A dog spent every night outside the same house, and the family had absolutely no idea why. For weeks, they watched this mysterious visitor pace their yard, stare at their windows, and scratch at the same spot on their property over and over again. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't begging for food. It was deliberate, intentional. Like the dog was trying to tell them something urgent. But when they finally discovered what was hidden inside their house, it didn't just answer their questions. It made international headlines. It started on a Tuesday night in October. Sarah Mitchell was washing dishes when she first noticed it. A golden retriever sitting perfectly still in the middle of their front lawn, staring directly at the house. Not at her, not at the window. At the house itself, like it was studying the structure, memorizing every detail. "That's weird," she muttered, drying her hands on a towel. She watched for another minute, expecting the dog to lose interest and wander off. Dogs always did. But this one didn't move. It just sat there, patient and focused, as if it had all the time in the world. Sarah mentioned it to her husband, Michael, when he came home from work the next morning. He laughed it off. "Probably just a stray looking for food," he said, kissing her on the cheek. "It'll move on." But it didn't move on. Night after night, the dog returned. Same time, same spot, same unwavering focus on their house. By the end of the first week, Sarah had stopped being amused and started being concerned. This wasn't normal dog behavior. Normal dogs were curious, playful, distracted. This dog was methodical. "Do you think it's sick?" she asked Michael one evening, watching the golden retriever pace back and forth across their lawn like a soldier on patrol. "Maybe it escaped from somewhere," Michael suggested. But even he seemed unsettled now. The dog's persistence was starting to get under their skin. Their teenage daughter, Emma, became obsessed. She'd sit by the window for hours, notebook in hand, documenting the dog's movements. What time it arrived, how long it stayed, where it focused its attention. By day 10, Emma had filled 3 pages with observations. "Dad, this dog is looking for something," Emma said one evening, her voice serious in a way that made both parents pause. "It's not random. Look at the pattern." Michael studied her notes. She was right. The dog's behavior wasn't random at all. It arrived between 9 and 9:30 p.m. every single night. It stayed for approximately 2 hours. And during those 2 hours, it never once looked away from the house. Specifically, it never looked away from the left side of the house, the basement side. "We should call animal control," Sarah said, but there was hesitation in her voice. The dog hadn't done anything wrong. It hadn't been aggressive or threatening. It had simply shown up, night after night, faithful, persistent, almost desperate. "Not yet," Michael said, surprising himself. "Let's wait a little longer. See what happens." What happened was that the dog's visits became more intense. By week 2, the golden retriever wasn't just sitting and staring anymore. It was scratching at the ground in one specific spot. Always the same spot, always with increasing urgency. Its paws were getting raw. Its fur was matted with dirt. It looked exhausted, like it hadn't slept properly in days. Sarah brought the dog food and water. It ate the food, but only out of necessity, like fuel. Its eyes never left the house. Its focus was absolute, unbreakable. "This dog is trying to tell us something," Emma whispered one night, her face pressed against the window glass. "I'm telling you, Dad, this is serious." Michael didn't argue anymore. He felt it too. That strange, electric sensation that something was wrong. that this dog's nightly vigil wasn't about hunger or homesickness or any ordinary reason a dog might show up at a stranger's house. This was about purpose. By the end of week 2, the family had stopped questioning whether they should investigate and started asking how they could help. The dog clearly needed them to understand something. But what? Sarah began researching online. Lost dog reports. She typed into the search bar, scrolling through pages and pages of missing pets. Nothing matched. No golden retriever had been reported missing in their area. No owner was desperately searching. This dog belonged to no one. Or rather, it belonged to something. Some purpose. Some mission that had driven it to their house night after night, refusing to give up, refusing to accept failure. "We need to follow it," Michael said suddenly one evening. "See where it comes from. Maybe that will tell us what it wants." But the dog never left. When morning came, it would simply disappear, vanishing into the neighborhood like smoke, only to reappear the following night at the exact same time. It was as if the dog only existed in the darkness, only came alive when night fell, only had purpose when the sun went down. And with each passing night, the dog's desperation grew more visible. Its scratching at that one spot became almost frantic. Its staring became more intense. It was like watching someone try to communicate an urgent message through a thick wall of glass. You could see the desperation, feel the importance, but you couldn't understand the words. By night 16, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. "We're going to figure this out," she told the dog one evening, sitting on the porch steps with her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. "Whatever you're trying to tell us, we're going to understand. I promise." The dog looked at her then, really looked at her, and for just a moment, Sarah swore she saw relief in its eyes, like it had been waiting for someone to finally say those words, like it had been counting on the fact that eventually someone would listen. But what the family didn't know was that the dog's message was far more urgent than they could have possibly imagined. Sarah couldn't sleep anymore. It had been 3 weeks since the dog first appeared, and she found herself lying awake at night, listening for the sound of paws on their front lawn. Around 9:15 p.m., like clockwork, she'd hear it. That soft padding sound, the slight crunch of gravel. The dog had arrived. She'd slip out of bed without waking Michael and make her way to the living room window, watching in the darkness as the golden retriever began its nightly ritual. Pace, stare, scratch, repeat, over and over. The same movements, the same focus, the same obsession. And Sarah had become equally obsessed. She started leaving detailed notes on the kitchen counter, timestamps, behaviors, weather conditions, anything that might provide a clue. Michael would find them in the morning and shake his head. But he never told her to stop. He understood. They both did. This wasn't about a stray dog anymore. This was about a mystery, and mysteries demanded to be solved. Emma had taken her observations to the next level entirely. She'd created a spreadsheet, a color-coded spreadsheet with columns for date, time, duration, location, and notable behaviors. Her friends at school thought she was insane. Emma didn't care. She was convinced, absolutely certain, that the dog's pattern would eventually reveal something crucial. "Look at this," Emma said one morning, spreading her laptop across the kitchen table. "The scratching spot. It's always in the exact same location, within like 6 inches, every single night. That's not random, Mom. That's deliberate." Sarah leaned over the laptop, studying the photographs Emma had taken. She was right. The spot was consistent, precise, like the dog knew exactly where it needed to dig. "That's directly above the basement," Michael said quietly, joining them at the table. He'd been thinking about this too, they all had. The basement was the only part of the house the dog ever focused on, the only area that seemed to matter. "We need to go down there," Sarah said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. "We need to look at what's directly under that spot." Michael hesitated. "We've lived here for 8 years. There's nothing down there but boxes and old furniture." "Then we'll confirm that," Sarah replied. "But we need to check. We have to check." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah and Michael descended into the basement with flashlights. The air was cool and musty, carrying that distinctive smell of concrete and age. They'd been down here dozens of times, storing Christmas decorations, old clothes, forgotten items. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like they were looking for something. They made their way to the spot directly above where the dog had been scratching. It was near the far corner, partially hidden behind boxes of old textbooks and photo albums. Nothing remarkable, nothing unusual. "See?" Michael said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just the basement." But Sarah wasn't satisfied. She started moving boxes, her movements becoming more purposeful, more urgent. Michael joined her, and together they cleared the area, creating space, opening up the corner that had been sealed off by years of accumulated storage. That's when Emma's voice came from the top of the basement stairs. "Find anything?" "Go back to bed," Sarah called up. But Emma was already descending, her phone's flashlight adding to the illumination. "You're checking under the scratching spot," Emma stated. It wasn't a question. "We are," Michael confirmed. "And there's nothing here, kiddo, just—" He stopped mid-sentence, because now that the boxes were cleared, they could see it. A faint outline in the concrete floor. A seam. A line that suggested there was something beneath the basement floor itself. The three of them stood frozen, staring down at it. "That's not supposed to be there," Sarah whispered. Michael crouched down, running his fingers along the concrete seam. It was deliberate, intentional. Someone had sealed something into the basement floor, and they'd done it carefully, professionally, in a way designed to be overlooked unless you were specifically looking for it. "We need to open it," Emma said, her voice barely audible. "We need to call someone," Michael countered. But he was already looking for tools, already moving with purpose toward the workbench on the far side of the basement. It took them 40 minutes of careful work with a pry bar and chisel to loosen the concrete panel. It wasn't large, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet. But it was heavy, and it had been sealed with what looked like industrial-grade adhesive. When they finally managed to lift it free, what they found underneath made all three of them step back. A metal box, weathered, locked, and beside it, a stack of old photographs held together with a rubber band that had long since lost its elasticity. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for the photographs. The rubber band crumbled to dust at her touch, and the photos scattered across the concrete floor like autumn leaves. She picked one up, angling it toward the flashlight. Her breath caught. The photograph showed a young woman, couldn't have been more than 25, smiling at the camera. But what made Sarah's stomach drop was the location in the photo. It was their house. Specifically, it was their front lawn, and the woman was standing right where the dog had been scratching every single night. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, looking over her mother's shoulder. There were more photographs. The same woman in different locations around the house, on the porch, by the basement window, in the backyard. And in every single photograph, she was smiling. Genuinely, beautifully smiling, like she was exactly where she wanted to be. Michael picked up another photo. His face had gone pale. "These are old," he said. "Look at the quality, the color saturation. These have to be from the 90s, maybe earlier." Sarah's mind was racing. The previous owners. These photographs had to be from the previous owners. But why would they seal photographs and a locked metal box into the basement floor? Why hide something so deliberately? "We need to open that box," Emma said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. Michael retrieved a hammer and chisel from the workbench. It took several minutes of careful work to break the lock without damaging whatever was inside. When the lid finally popped open, they found documents, letters, a journal with a worn leather cover. And beneath it all, a small wooden object that looked like it had been carved by hand. A tiny dog, no more than 3 inches tall, with surprising detail and obvious care. Sarah picked up the journal with shaking hands and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, careful, deliberate. "My name is Margaret Chen, and I need someone to know the truth. If you're reading this, it means the dog finally found someone who would listen. It means someone finally cared enough to dig. And it means I'm not coming back." The basement fell silent, except for the sound of their breathing. "This is..." Michael couldn't finish the sentence. "This is huge," Emma finished for him. Sarah kept reading, her eyes moving faster and faster across the page. "I was 23 years old when I came to this house. I was running from something, someone, and I thought I'd finally found safety. I thought I'd finally found a place where I could disappear and start over. But I was wrong. He found me here, and when he did, everything changed." Sarah looked up from the journal, her eyes meeting Michael's. "We need to read all of this," she said. "We need to understand what happened." But even as she said it, she realized that understanding this mystery wouldn't be simple. Understanding it would be dangerous. Because whatever was hidden in this basement, whatever story was sealed into the concrete floor, it was connected to the dog's nightly vigil in a way that went far beyond a simple lost pet. The dog had been trying to lead them to a secret. And now that they'd found it, there was no going back. Sarah read through the night. The journal was written in Margaret Chen's careful handwriting, page after page of revelations that painted a picture of desperation, danger, and a love so fierce it had transcended death itself. Each word was deliberate, each sentence a piece of a puzzle that had been waiting 30 years to be assembled. Michael and Emma sat on either side of her in the basement, reading over her shoulders, their faces growing more horrified with each passing page. The basement, which had seemed like just another storage space hours ago, now felt like a tomb, a sacred chamber where secrets had been preserved with the precision of an archaeological dig. By the time the sun began to rise, casting pale gray light through the basement's single high window, they understood everything. And understanding everything meant they could never go back to their ordinary lives. Margaret Chen had been a pianist, not just talented, exceptionally talented. According to the documents in the metal box, she'd attended Juilliard on a full scholarship. She'd performed at Carnegie Hall. She'd been featured in the New York Times. She was on track to become one of the most celebrated classical musicians of her generation. Then she met David Hartley at a charity gala in Manhattan. He was handsome in that particular way that wealth and confidence can manufacture. Tailored suits, expensive watch, the kind of smile that made people feel special when it was directed at them. He was also 15 years older than Margaret, established in his career as a venture capitalist, connected to the right people, invited to the right events. When he asked for her number, Margaret said yes. When he asked her to dinner, she said yes again. And when he asked her to move in with him after 3 months of dating, she said yes because by then, he'd already begun the slow, methodical process of making her believe that saying no wasn't really an option. The journal's early entries were almost romantic. David took me to the Metropolitan Opera House tonight. He reserved a private box. We watched La Bohème, and during the intermission, he told me he'd never felt this way about anyone before. He said I was his muse. He said my music was beautiful. But I was even more beautiful. He said he wanted to take care of me, to make sure I never had to worry about anything ever again. But the tone shifted gradually, almost imperceptibly. David didn't like that I spent so much time at the piano today. He said I was neglecting him. He said he gave up his entire evening to be with me, and I repaid him by ignoring him in favor of Chopin. I tried to explain that I have a recital next month, but he said my priorities were wrong. He said if I really loved him, I would make time for him. I don't know how to make him understand that music is part of who I am. He threw a glass at the wall today. It didn't hit me. I don't think he meant for it to. But the way he looked at me afterward, like he was testing something, like he was wondering how far he could push before I would break. I asked him what was wrong, and he said I was being ungrateful. He said he'd given up everything for me, and I was throwing it back in his face by being difficult. I apologized. I'm still not sure what I did wrong, but I apologized. He won't let me call my parents anymore. He says they're a bad influence. He says they never supported his relationship with me, and therefore they don't deserve to speak to me. I miss my mother. I haven't heard her voice in 6 weeks. David says that's for the best. He says I need to focus on being a good partner to him, and outside relationships are a distraction. The entries became darker, more desperate. He hit me today. Not hard. He was very careful about it. He hit me somewhere the bruises won't show. On my ribs, on my thighs. Places that will hurt when I move, but places that won't be visible if I wear the right clothes. He said it was my fault. He said I made him do it by being disrespectful. He said if I would just learn to listen, to obey, to understand that he knows what's best for me, then he would never have to do it again. I believe him. I think I deserve it. I think I must have done something wrong. I tried to leave today. I packed a suitcase while he was at work, and I called a taxi. But he came home early. I don't know how he knew. Maybe he always comes home early and I just didn't notice. Maybe he has someone watching me. When he saw the suitcase, he didn't yell. He didn't get angry. He just sat down on the bed and cried. He said I was breaking his heart. He said he loved me more than anything in the world, and if I left him, he would die. He said he couldn't live without me. He held me while he cried, and I held him back, and I unpacked the suitcase. How could I leave someone who loves me that much? He's been different lately. Colder. He watches me constantly. He checks my phone. He reads my emails. He's installed some kind of tracking software on my laptop. He says it's because he loves me and he needs to know where I am at all times, to keep me safe. He says the world is dangerous for beautiful women, and he's protecting me. When I questioned it, he reminded me of what happened the last time I tried to leave. He didn't have to say it explicitly. We both remembered. The hospital visit. The lies I told the doctor about falling down the stairs. The way he held my hand the entire time and told me he was sorry, that he would never hurt me again, that he loved me. The entries became sporadic, written in moments of privacy that Margaret had to fight for. I haven't played piano in 4 months. He says it's a waste of time. He says I should focus on being a good wife. Though we're not married, he uses the word constantly. He says wives don't neglect their husbands for hobbies. He says my talent is wasted on concert halls filled with strangers. He says the only performance that matters is the one I give for him, in private, in the ways that please him. I don't play piano anymore. I don't know who I am without piano. I think that might be the point. I'm pregnant. I found out yesterday. I haven't told him yet. I'm terrified. He's been talking about children, about how a baby would bind us together forever, about how I would finally understand what it means to have a real purpose. But I'm also terrified because I know what kind of father he would be. I know what kind of life our child would have. And I can't let that happen. I won't let that happen. I told him about the baby. He was overjoyed. He picked me up and spun me around, and for just a moment, I let myself believe that maybe this would change things. Maybe a baby would make him happy enough that he would stop hurting me. Maybe I could finally have the life I thought I was signing up for. But then he set me down, and his expression changed. He said the baby was his, that it belonged to him, that I belonged to him, that we all belonged to him, and we would never leave, and we would never betray him, and we would never make him regret the sacrifices he'd made for us. And I understood, in that moment, that I had made a terrible mistake, that I had trapped myself and my unborn child with a man who saw us as possessions, not people. I lost the baby today. I was 8 weeks along. I fell down the stairs. David says it was an accident. He says I was careless. He says I should have been more careful with something so precious. But I remember his hand on my back. I remember the way he was smiling before I fell. I remember the way he didn't call an ambulance immediately. He waited, watching me bleed, before he finally decided to take me to the hospital. The doctor asked if I'd fallen, and David was there, holding my hand, smiling at me with such tenderness that I nodded. Yes, I said. I fell. It was an accident. And he squeezed my hand, and I understood. This was the price of trying to leave. This was the cost of betrayal. After the miscarriage, something broke inside Margaret. Or perhaps something finally healed. The entries shifted from despair to determination. I'm leaving. I don't know how yet, but I'm leaving. I can't stay. I can't let him do to another child what he did to mine. I can't let him destroy me completely. I have to believe that somewhere, there's a version of me that still exists. The girl who played Chopin at Carnegie Hall, the girl who had dreams, the girl who knew her own name. I have to find her again. The next entries documented her planning with meticulous care. She opened a secret bank account using a false name. She gathered documents, her birth certificate, her social security number, copies of her medical records that documented her injuries. She researched safe houses and women's shelters. She learned how to cover her digital tracks. She prepared for war against the man she'd once loved. I've saved enough money. $15,000, hidden in cash in a safety deposit box under an assumed name. It's enough to disappear. It's enough to start over. It's enough to survive long enough to figure out what comes next. I'm leaving next Tuesday. He has a business trip to Boston. I'll have 48 hours before he realizes I'm gone. 48 hours to get far away enough that he can't find me. I adopted a dog today. Her name is Hope. She's a golden retriever puppy, only 8 weeks old. David doesn't know about her yet. I'm keeping her at a friend's house, one of the few friends he hasn't managed to isolate me from. Hope is going to be my companion. She's going to be my reason to keep going when things get hard. She's going to be my proof that I can still love something, that I can still be loved in return, without fear, without pain. The final entries before her escape were written with a clarity and purpose that was almost heartbreaking. I leave tomorrow. I've said goodbye to my mother in a letter I'll mail from 3 states away. I've transferred what money I could without raising suspicion. I've packed a single suitcase with clothes and documents. I've arranged for Hope to be transported to my new location by a friend who understands the situation. I've researched a small town in the Pacific Northwest where no one knows my name, where I can be invisible, where I can finally be safe. I'm terrified, but I'm also hopeful. For the first time in 3 years, I'm hopeful. And that hope, that fragile, precious hope, is named after the only creature in my life who has ever loved me without conditions, without expectations, without cruelty. If David finds me, if he brings me back, if this escape fails like every other escape I've attempted, I'm leaving this record. I'm documenting everything. I'm sealing it away where no one can destroy it. And I'm trusting that somehow, someday, someone will find it. Someone will read my story. Someone will understand that I didn't disappear. I was taken. And they will use what I've left behind to stop him from taking anyone else. My name is Margaret Chen. I was a pianist. I had a dream. And I'm going to fight for my life, even if it kills me. Sarah closed the journal, her hands trembling so violently that Michael had to take it from her before she dropped it. She's dead, Emma whispered, her voice small and hollow in the basement's cold silence. She's been dead this whole time. Or he killed her and made it look like she disappeared. Michael said grimly, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles stood out in sharp relief. Either way, she's been gone for nearly 30 years, and no one knew. No one even looked for her. The realization was suffocating. Margaret Chen had been a talented, accomplished woman with a promising future. She'd been someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone's hope for the future. And when she disappeared, the world had simply moved on. Her absence had barely registered. No missing persons case had made the news. No search parties had been organized. She'd simply vanished, and everyone, except for one faithful dog, had forgotten. Sarah moved to the metal box and carefully removed each item, laying them out on the concrete floor like an archaeologist documenting a crime scene. There were photographs, dozens of them. Margaret at the piano, her fingers poised above the keys, her expression one of pure concentration and joy. Margaret at her high school graduation. Margaret with her parents, their faces bright with pride. Margaret with David Hartley, his arm around her waist, his smile predatory in a way that only became obvious once you knew the truth. But there were also photographs that documented the abuse. Bruises on her arms, her neck, her legs. Medical records from emergency room visits. A restraining order that had been filed and then mysteriously dropped. Police reports that had been filed and then closed. The system had failed her at every turn, and Margaret had known it. So she'd documented everything herself, building a case that the authorities wouldn't build, gathering evidence that no one had asked her to gather. She was gathering evidence against him, Michael said, his voice hollow as he examined the documents. She was building a case even as she was running for her life. She knew, Sarah realized. She knew he would do this to other women. She knew that if she didn't stop him, he would hurt someone else. So she made sure that if anything happened to her, the evidence would survive. Michael was already on his phone, his fingers moving with purpose as he searched. The basement seemed to hold its breath as they waited for the results to load. What he found made his face go even paler than it already was. David Hartley. He read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Arrested in 2003 for the disappearance of a woman named Jennifer Walsh. The case went cold. But there were 3 other women who went missing in the same region between 1997 and 2002. All of them fit the same profile: young, talented, educated, trying to escape abusive relationships. All of them disappeared without a trace. All of them are presumed dead. He was a serial killer, Emma said flatly, stating the obvious because sometimes stating the obvious was the only way to make it real. Margaret was right. She was documenting a serial killer, and she knew he wouldn't stop with her. Sarah felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders, like a physical thing, the weight of Margaret's story, Margaret's desperate attempt to warn the world, Margaret's faith that somehow, someday, someone would find what she'd hidden and use it to stop him. The weight of 30 years of silence. The weight of all the women who had come after Margaret, who might have been saved if anyone had been listening. And it had taken a dog. A loyal, patient, heartbroken dog that had waited nearly 30 years for someone to finally listen. "We need to call the police," Michael said, and his voice was shaking now. "We need to call them right now." But Sarah was already thinking ahead, her mind racing through the implications. "We need to call the FBI," she corrected, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "This is bigger than local police. This involves multiple states, multiple victims, a cold case that might finally be solved. This is federal." The call came at 6:47 a.m. Within 2 hours, their basement was filled with federal agents, forensic specialists, and investigators who treated every photograph, every document, every word in Margaret's journal like the precious evidence it was. They photographed everything. They documented everything. They handled Margaret's journal with the reverence usually reserved for religious texts. Special Agent Patricia Morrison was the lead investigator assigned to the case. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and the kind of competence that came from 2 decades of investigating violent crimes. She sat with Sarah in the living room while her team worked in the basement. And she listened to everything. Not just the facts, but the emotion behind them. "This is extraordinary," Agent Morrison said when Sarah had finished. "In all my years, I've never seen a victim document her abuser's crimes with this level of detail and organization." She was building a prosecution case. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew he wouldn't stop, Sarah said. She knew that if she didn't do something, he would hurt other women. "And she was right," Agent Morrison said grimly. "David Hartley has been a person of interest in at least 7 disappearances across 3 states. We've never had enough evidence to charge him with anything beyond the Jennifer Walsh case, and that went cold years ago. But this," she gestured toward the basement, "this changes everything." By noon, the story had begun to spread. Local news picked it up first, a human interest story about a dog's loyalty and persistence. But as the details emerged, as the investigation deepened, the story evolved into something much larger and much darker. "Dog's 30-year vigil leads to discovery of serial killer's evidence," the headline screamed. "Woman's final message found after decades, justice through a faithful dog. The dog that wouldn't give up, how one pet solved a 30-year-old mystery. Serial killer's documented crimes discovered in sealed basement. Victim's journal may reopen multiple cold cases." The story went viral. News helicopters circled their house. Reporters camped on their lawn. Their quiet suburban neighborhood became the center of a media frenzy that showed no signs of stopping. David Hartley was arrested at his home in Portland that evening at 6:34 p.m. as he was leaving his office. The FBI agents who arrested him said he seemed almost unsurprised, as if he'd been waiting for this moment, as if some part of him had always known that Margaret would find a way to reach out from beyond the grave. The evidence Margaret had compiled, combined with new forensic techniques and fresh investigative work enabled by her documentation, was enough to reopen cases that had gone cold for decades. Within 6 months, David Hartley was convicted of 4 murders: Margaret Chen, Jennifer Walsh, and 2 other women whose remains were eventually found on his property. Within a year, authorities were investigating connections to 7 more disappearances across 3 states. The FBI estimated that David Hartley had killed at least 9 women, possibly more. He was sentenced to life without parole, and then additional life sentences for each subsequent conviction. Margaret Chen's name was finally spoken aloud. Her story was finally heard, and the dog, Hope, became a symbol of loyalty, of persistence, of the refusal to let injustice go unnoticed. Animal welfare organizations contacted the Mitchells about Hope's story. Documentary filmmakers wanted to chronicle her life. Children's book authors wanted to write about her. Hope became famous, but more importantly, Margaret became real again. Margaret became a person, not just a statistic, not just a cold case file gathering dust in a basement somewhere. But for Sarah, Michael, and Emma, the real revelation came 3 weeks after the discovery, when a letter arrived at their house in an official FBI envelope. It was from the Bureau, and it contained a single piece of information that made them all sit down in shock. Margaret's body had been found. The letter explained that during the search of David Hartley's property in Portland, investigators had discovered human remains buried in a shallow grave beneath a concrete pad in the basement. Forensic analysis had confirmed that the remains belonged to Margaret Chen. She'd been buried there for nearly 30 years, hidden away in darkness, forgotten by the world. But she wasn't forgotten anymore. The forensic evidence confirmed what Margaret's journal had suggested. She hadn't taken her own life. David had murdered her, then disappeared her body, then continued his pattern of violence with other women. He'd killed her because she'd tried to leave him. He'd killed her because she'd threatened his control. He'd killed her because, in his mind, she belonged to him, and no one left what belonged to him. But Margaret had known. Somehow, in her final moments, she'd known what was coming. And she'd made sure that even in death, she would speak. Even in silence, she would be heard. The funeral. The Mitchells attended Margaret's funeral, a service held 3 months after her body was discovered, attended by victims' families, law enforcement officials, media representatives, and what seemed like half the town. Margaret's parents, now in their 80s, sat in the front row, their faces carved from grief and the terrible knowledge that they'd lost their daughter 3 decades ago, and had only just learned the truth. Margaret's mother, Helen Chen, approached Sarah after the service. She was a small woman, made smaller by grief, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for bringing my daughter home." Sarah didn't know what to say. She took Helen's hand and held it, and they stood together in silence. 2 women separated by tragedy, but united by love for the same person. Emma carried Hope, the original Hope, now elderly, but still alive, still watching, still waiting, into the cemetery. The dog moved slowly, her joints stiff with age, her golden fur now streaked with gray. But her eyes were still bright, still aware, still focused. As they lowered Margaret's casket into the ground, Emma placed a hand on Hope's head. "You did it," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You finally brought her home. Hope looked up at her with ancient, knowing eyes. And for just a moment, Sarah could have sworn the dog smiled. A genuine, peaceful smile, as if a burden that had been carried for 30 years had finally been set down. The cemetery was quiet, except for the sound of wind moving through the trees and the soft weeping of Margaret's parents. As the casket disappeared into the earth, Sarah found herself thinking about all the things Margaret would never do. She would never play Carnegie Hall again. She would never record an album. She would never teach music to a new generation of students. She would never fall in love with someone who treated her with kindness. She would never have children, never grow old, never experience the ordinary joys and sorrows that make up a human life. But she would be remembered. Her name would be spoken. Her story would be told. And because of her courage, because of her determination to document the truth even as she was running for her life, other women would be saved. Other families would be spared the loss that Margaret's parents had endured. As they walked away from the grave, Hope paused and looked back, her gaze fixed on the spot where Margaret was being buried. For a long moment, the dog stood perfectly still, her body tense with some emotion that Sarah couldn't quite name. Then, slowly, Hope turned and continued walking, her pace steady, her purpose fulfilled. But the story didn't end there. Because 3 weeks later, something unexpected happened that would change everything the Mitchells thought they understood about Hope, about Margaret, and about the nature of loyalty itself. Something that would prove that some bonds transcend death itself. It happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Margaret's funeral. Sarah was in the kitchen making coffee when she noticed that Hope hadn't eaten her breakfast. The dog's bowl sat untouched on the tile floor, and Hope herself was lying in her favorite spot by the window, the same window where she'd watched the house night after night for 30 years. "Hope?" Sarah called softly, setting down her coffee mug. "Are you okay, girl?" Hope didn't respond. She didn't lift her head. She didn't even open her eyes. She simply lay there, her breathing shallow and labored, her once vibrant golden coat now dull and matted. Sarah's stomach clenched with a terrible understanding. She knelt beside the dog, running her hand gently along Hope's side. The dog's body was warm but fragile, like touching something made of spun glass. Hope's eyes opened slowly, and she looked up at Sarah with an expression of such profound peace that it broke Sarah's heart. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, girl. You can rest now. You did everything you needed to do. You brought her home. You can rest." Hope's tail thumped weakly against the floor, once, twice. And then the dog's eyes closed. Her breathing became even more shallow. And within the hour, Hope was gone. The Mitchells buried Hope in their backyard, in the spot where the dog had scratched so desperately all those months ago. They planted a rosebush above her grave. Margaret's favorite flower, according to the photographs in the journal. Emma read a poem she'd written herself, her voice wavering but steady. "You came to us on a Tuesday night, with a message burning bright, a faithful heart that would not rest, until the truth passed every test. For 30 years you carried pain, through sunshine and through rain, a love so fierce it could not die, a bond that reached beyond the sky. You brought her home, you made us see that justice lives in loyalty, that love can speak across the years, through scratching paws and patient tears. Now rest, dear Hope. Your work is done. Your vigil ends, your battle won. You sleep beneath the roses fair, with Margaret waiting there. Michael stood with his arm around Emma's shoulders, and Sarah held the small wooden dog that had been carved by Margaret's own hands all those years ago. The dog that had been sealed in the metal box, waiting to be found. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Hope, about the impossible nature of what the dog had done, about the way Hope had waited 30 years without knowing if anyone would ever listen, about the unwavering faith that had driven the dog night after night to scratch at the concrete, to stare at the house, to refuse to give up. Around 2 a.m., unable to sleep any longer, Sarah went downstairs and retrieved Margaret's journal from the safe, where the FBI had returned it after the investigation concluded. She opened it to a page near the end, one she'd read a dozen times but never fully understood. The entry was dated March 10th, 1997, 5 days before Margaret's final entry. I've been thinking about Hope a lot lately, about what it means to love something so completely that you would do anything to protect it. I've been thinking about the fact that Hope doesn't understand what's happening. She doesn't know that I'm in danger. She doesn't know that I'm planning to run, or that I'm terrified, or that I might not survive what's coming. She just loves me, unconditionally, without reservation, without fear. And I've realized something. That's what I need to be. That's what I need to become. I need to love life, my own future, my own possibility of happiness, the way Hope loves me, without reservation, without fear, with absolute faith that somehow, against all odds, things will work out. But I also realize that Hope might outlive me. That's the terrible thing about loving a dog. They're bound to outlive you, bound to mourn you, bound to carry the weight of your absence long after you're gone. And if something happens to me, if David finds me and if he does what I know he's capable of doing, Hope will be alone. So I'm making a decision. I'm making a promise. If I don't survive this, if my attempt to escape fails, if David brings me back or finds me or does whatever it is that he's planning to do, I'm going to find a way to come back. I'm going to find a way to reach out from wherever I am and guide Hope to someone who will listen, someone who will care, someone who will understand what Hope is trying to tell them. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if love can transcend death, if consciousness can survive the body, if there's any way for me to keep my promise from beyond the grave. But I have to believe it. I have to believe that love is stronger than death. I have to believe that the bond between me and Hope is strong enough to survive anything. Even murder, even burial, even 30 years of silence. If I'm wrong, then Hope will simply be a loyal dog who loved her owner and waited for her to come home. But if I'm right, then Hope will be my messenger. Hope will be the way I reach out to the world and say, I was here, I mattered, I loved, and I was murdered by a man who is still out there, still hunting, still taking what doesn't belong to him. Hope, if you're reading this, and I know you can't read, but I'm going to believe that somehow you understand. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I have to leave you. I'm sorry that I might not be coming back. But I need you to be brave. I need you to wait. And when the time is right, I need you to lead someone to the truth. Can you do that for me? Can you be my voice when I can't speak anymore? Sarah closed the journal, her hands shaking. She'd read that entry a dozen times, but she'd never fully grasped what Margaret was saying. Margaret hadn't just hidden evidence in the basement. Margaret had made a conscious decision to trust Hope with her message. Margaret had believed, or at least had desperately hoped, that somehow, across the barrier of death, Her love for Hope would be strong enough to guide the dog to the right people at the right time. And it had worked. Against all odds, against logic, against everything that science and reason could explain, it had worked. Hope had waited. Hope had watched. Hope had scratched and stared and refused to give up. Night after night, year after year, decade after decade, until finally, someone had listened. Sarah found herself wondering, was it possible? Could love really transcend death? Could the bond between a human and an animal be strong enough to survive murder, burial, and 30 years of silence? The rational part of her mind said no. The rational part of her mind said that Hope had simply been a dog, a loyal, devoted dog, but still just a dog. And that the dog's behavior had been coincidence, or instinct, or some combination of factors that had nothing to do with Margaret's consciousness reaching out from beyond the grave, but another part of Sarah. The part that had held Hope's paw as the dog died, the part that had felt the dog's peaceful resignation, the part that had seen the relief in Hope's eyes when the burden of 30 years was finally set down. That part of her believed something else entirely. That part of her believed in miracles. The aftermath. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of Hope and Margaret continued to grow. True crime podcasts devoted entire seasons to the case. Documentaries were made. Margaret's story was adapted into a feature film that premiered at Sundance. Children's books were written about Hope's loyalty. Animal behaviorists debated whether it was possible for a dog to carry a message across decades. Paranormal researchers speculated about the nature of consciousness and whether love could transcend physical death. But for Sarah, Michael, and Emma, the most important aftermath was quieter and more personal. Margaret's parents established a scholarship fund in Margaret's name, dedicated to supporting young musicians who were escaping abusive relationships. The scholarship had already helped 17 women pursue their musical dreams in safety and freedom. Helen Chen, Margaret's mother, became an advocate for domestic violence awareness, traveling the country and telling her daughter's story, making sure that Margaret's tragedy would not be forgotten, that other families would not experience the same loss. The case against David Hartley was airtight. Margaret's journal, combined with the forensic evidence and the testimony of other survivors, resulted in a conviction that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. But more than that, the case had reopened investigations into dozens of other disappearances, and authorities were still working through cold cases, still searching for other victims, still trying to understand the full scope of Hartley's crimes. The Mitchells' house became something of a pilgrimage site for people interested in the case. They received hundreds of letters from around the world, from abuse survivors who had found courage in Margaret's story, from dog lovers who had been moved by Hope's loyalty, from people who simply wanted to express their gratitude for the Mitchells' role in bringing justice to a woman who had been forgotten. Sarah found herself becoming an advocate as well, speaking at domestic violence awareness events, telling the story of how a dog's persistence had solved a 30-year-old mystery, reminding people that victims matter, that their stories matter, that even when someone has been silenced by violence, their voice can still be heard. But the question that haunted Sarah, the question that she couldn't quite answer, was the one that Hope had posed simply by existing, by waiting, by refusing to give up. Was it possible for love to transcend death? The letter. 6 months after Hope's death, Sarah received a letter. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address, postmarked from a small town in Oregon. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in handwriting that Sarah recognized immediately. It was Margaret's handwriting. Sarah's hands shook as she read. Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, then Hope has completed her mission. If you're reading this, then you know the truth about what happened to me. If you're reading this, then my death was not in vain. I don't know how this letter is reaching you. I wrote it 30 years ago and sealed it in an envelope with instructions that it should only be mailed if hope successfully led someone to the truth. I left it with a trusted friend with the understanding that if I disappeared, if I didn't contact her within 2 weeks, she should mail this letter to whoever had discovered the evidence I left behind. I don't know if she kept her promise. I don't know if this letter has been traveling through the mail system for 30 years, or if it was only recently sent. But I know that if you're reading it, then hope succeeded. Then my voice was heard. Then justice was served. I want you to know something. I wasn't afraid of dying. By the time I decided to hide my evidence and trust hope with my message, I had already accepted that I might not survive. What I was afraid of was being forgotten. What I was afraid of was disappearing without anyone knowing that I had existed, that I had mattered, that I had loved and been loved in return. Hope gave me the gift of being remembered. Hope made sure that my story would be told. And in doing that, hope saved other women, women I will never meet, women who will never know my name, women who will live lives of freedom and safety, because hope refused to give up. I want you to know that I'm grateful. I want you to know that even though I was murdered, even though my life was cut short, even though I never got to play Carnegie Hall again, or fall in love, or have children, or experience any of the ordinary joys that make life worth living, I want you to know that I'm grateful, because my death and Hope's loyalty and your willingness to listen have created something meaningful, something that will ripple forward through time and touch lives in ways I could never have imagined. Take care of Hope. Love her. Tell her that she was the bravest creature I ever knew. Tell her that she was my greatest love, my truest friend, my reason to keep fighting even when fighting seemed impossible. And tell her that I'm waiting. Tell her that wherever consciousness goes after death, I'm waiting for her there. Tell her that our bond didn't end when I died. Tell her that love is stronger than death, stronger than silence, stronger than all the terrible things that humans do to each other. Tell her that I'm proud of her. With eternal gratitude and love, Margaret Chen. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she read it again and again. She showed it to Michael and Emma, and they sat together in the living room, holding the letter like it was made of spun glass, like it might dissolve if they weren't careful. "Do you think it's real?" Emma asked quietly. "I don't know," Sarah said. "I don't know how it could be real, but I also don't know how any of this could be real. And yet it is. Maybe that's the point," Michael said softly. "Maybe love doesn't need to make logical sense. Maybe it just needs to be real." They buried the letter in a waterproof container next to Hope's grave, beneath the rose bush that had grown tall and beautiful in the months since they'd planted it. They added the wooden dog that Margaret had carved, and a photograph of Margaret at the piano, smiling at the camera with a joy that seemed to transcend time itself. Epilogue. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the cemetery on a cold November morning, exactly 1 year after Hope's death. The rosebush was covered in blooms, deep red roses that seemed to glow in the weak autumn sunlight. She wasn't alone. Emma stood beside her, now in her first year of music school, studying to become a classical pianist. Michael stood on her other side, his arm around Sarah's waist. And surrounding them were dozens of other people. Margaret's parents, FBI agents who had worked the case, survivors of domestic violence who had found strength in Margaret's story, animal lovers who had been moved by Hope's loyalty, and ordinary people who had simply been touched by the reminder that love, in its purest form, is a force that can transcend time, death, and all the terrible things that humans do to each other. Helen Chen, Margaret's mother, stepped forward and placed a bouquet of white lilies on Hope's grave. Her husband, David Chen, stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," Helen said, speaking to the grave, speaking to Hope, speaking to her daughter. "Thank you for bringing my daughter home. Thank you for refusing to give up. Thank you for showing us that love is stronger than death." As they stood in silence, Sarah found herself thinking about the nature of loyalty, about the power of love, about the way that one creature's unwavering devotion had changed the course of so many lives. She thought about Margaret, murdered and buried, her voice silenced by violence. And she thought about Hope, carrying that voice forward, refusing to let it be forgotten, serving as a messenger from beyond the grave. She thought about all the women who had been saved because Margaret had documented the truth, because Hope had refused to give up, because the Mitchells had been willing to listen. And she thought about the question that still haunted her. Was it possible for love to transcend death? Looking at the roses blooming above Hope's grave, looking at the peaceful expression on Helen Chen's face, looking at Emma, who had decided to pursue music because of Margaret's story, who carried her forward through her own passion and dedication. Sarah realized that the answer didn't matter. Whether it was scientifically possible or not, whether it could be explained by logic or reason or the laws of physics, it had happened. Love had transcended death. A message had been carried across 30 years. Justice had been served. And a woman who had been murdered and forgotten had become a symbol of courage, of resilience, of the power of the human spirit to endure even in the face of the most terrible darkness. As they walked away from the grave, Sarah looked back one more time. The rosebush swayed gently in the wind, its red blooms vivid against the gray November sky. And for just a moment, Sarah could have sworn she saw two figures standing beside the grave. A young woman with dark hair and a golden retriever, their forms luminous in the afternoon light, their bond unbroken, their love eternal. Then she blinked, and the figures were gone. But the roses remained, blooming year after year. A living testament to the power of love, the importance of being heard, and the extraordinary loyalty of one dog who refused to let the world forget. In the years that followed, Margaret's story continued to resonate with people around the world. The scholarship fund in her name had helped over 50 young musicians escape abusive relationships and pursue their dreams. Emma Mitchell became a concert pianist, and her debut album, dedicated to Margaret Chen, won critical acclaim. The Mitchells' house became a historical landmark, preserved as a reminder of the case that had captured the nation's heart. But perhaps most importantly, Margaret's story changed the way law enforcement approached cold cases involving missing persons. Her meticulous documentation became a model for how victims could protect themselves and their legacies, even when facing the most dangerous circumstances. And Hope's story changed the way people understood the bonds between humans and animals. It reminded us that loyalty, in its purest form, is not bound by death, not limited by time, not constrained by the physical laws that govern our understanding of reality. Hope's loyalty proved that love, true, unconditional, unwavering love, is the most powerful force in the universe. And that is a truth that will echo forward through time, generation after generation, reminding us all that even in the face of darkness, even when faced with the worst that humanity has to offer. Love endures. Love always endures.